Hello, everyone. It's Irene Lyon here, and I'm here today along with a special guest again. I'll bring him in a second. Seth Lyon, my husband and colleague, he's here to help with some Q&A today. But I'm going to do a little talking at the top of our hour here for this Q&A on all things smart body, smart mind. It is the 18th of September. It's the year 2022. And we're in a really exciting and busy time in my team. We are in the midst of enrolling and registering new members for something called Smart Body, Smart Mind. Often people abbreviate it SBSM. Kind of rhyme. It goes really quick when you say SBSM rather than Smart Body, Smart Mind. And I want to just do a bit of a quick, very quick origin story. What you get when you become a Smart Body, Smart Mind member, what nervous system health is for me. And I might even, when we get into this, get Seth to answer that as well for him. And then we're going to do lots of questions. So as a quick kind of overview of what SBSM is, this is a program my team and I have been running. I believe it was since 2015, 2014, if you count the renditions when it was just 5 weeks, and then it was 8 weeks. And now it's 12 weeks. And I quit my private practice. I was in a very successful private practice doing a blend of the Feldenkrais method, somatic experiencing, and something called somatic practice. And interestingly enough, towards the end of my practice, I was doing mainly somatic practice with my clients, which is the early developmental trauma work of our colleague, my colleague, and Seth's colleague, Kathy Kane, who is also a somatic experiencing practitioner and teacher. She is no longer in private practice. She only teaches. I was finding myself doing nothing but that because people needed deep, deep nervous system regulation work. While they may have had accidents and shock traumas and movement problems that they were trying to figure out, it was very clear that as a whole, the people coming to see me had what we would call dysregulation of their nervous system. So there was a lot of fight, flight, and freeze, that shutdown response stored up in their system. And for many of them, it wasn't just from one accident. I actually don't think I can think of one person that I saw that just had one injury. There was an 8-year-old that I worked with who had a scare from a dog. I remember that once in my practice. And that was like maybe one of the only times I saw a human that had one thing that we had to work on. That's telling. That's showing that humanity as a whole, many of us have had lots of early insult, lots of adversity. And so I was doing this very gentle, slow, connected work with people, in essence, helping them realize and feel into their bodies, into their nervous systems, into their organs, these patterns of fear, these patterns of terror, these patterns of tightness, these patterns of collapse. So long story short, it was very clear 1 hour with me a week was not enough. And some people did see me 1 hour a week for multiple years, and we did make progress. But what I realized, we needed to take this stuff and put it in a format so they could do homework at home and they could learn more of the theory. And then over the course of about 3 years, I started creating curriculums and exercises and homework and trainings. And that is now what is Smart Body, Smart Mind, and some of the other resources I have. So that's how it all developed. And this round that's going to start exactly a week today on the 25th of September with our first lab. This will be the 12th time we've run this program. So we have gotten very good as a team, professional team, myself, knowing what works, what doesn't. We've refined this curriculum greatly over the last 5 years. It's pretty remarkable. As a quick nutshell, as a member, it isn't just the 12-week experience. It is a lifelong journey. This doesn't mean that you'll be with me for the rest of your life. I hope not. I hope you find regulation and go off and do your world and do what you need to do. But at the outset, we're more concentrated in class, in learning. But when you do join and you become a member, you can come back and do the program with us every time it runs live. You can ask questions, you gain support from our team of right now we have 10 professional moderators who are trained in somatic experiencing. Pretty much most of them, I think, are trained also in somatic practice and some form of movement somatic modality. If you want to learn about them, all of their information is on the Smart Body, Smart Mind, or sorry, on my main website. You can see who these folks are that help. So it is a lifelong investment. In addition, there's support, as I mentioned. Our moderators are there to answer questions when we're in session and an extra 4 weeks after. So if you join this session next week, you will have daily moderation support until mid-January. I think the exact date is the 14th of January, 2023. And then we might, my hope is we run again in March. So we'll start up again. And then as alumni, you come back, you join. The curriculum is set with 2 forms of learning. One is education, one is theory, or sorry, one is practice. So the education is high level, non-dumbed down theory. I teach you everything that I can that I learned in my professional trainings. Now, this isn't making you a professional teacher of this work, but you're getting everything that I feel all humans should know and understand about their nervous system. The other branch of the work is what I call neurosensory exercises. This is a blend of all of the things I have learned through the somatic healing methodologies. And I won't name every single lesson, but as a whole, there are about 36 practices that you learn over the course of the 12 weeks. They range from learning how to connect to the environment, to learning how to connect to your organs, to learning how to connect with the gut, the brainstem, the movements of the body. They really are unique lessons. It is taking the somatic experiencing principles, the early trauma principles of somatic practice, and putting them in to a guided neurosensory exercise format. And when I say exercise, I don't mean big pumping, lifting weight kind of exercise. It's more intentional attention, guided focus of your body, and then using your mind and your essence essentially to bring more regulation to your body. In addition to this, we have bonuses. There are movement lessons that I do not teach. One of my colleagues, his name is Elia Marak. He and I are co-teachers of a very popular workshop called Up and Down, but he is a master in Tai Chi, Qigong, and dance. He's well-versed in this work. He's also trained with Kathy Kane, and his movement lessons are a bonus to becoming a member. They're pre-recorded. There are about 8 of them. And then there's a few other fun bonuses that come in. My husband, Seth, is a sound healer, a composer extraordinaire of healing music. So there's healing music that we also provide you, and a lot of other resources and elements to further your learning. And you also get entry into the 21-day nervous system tune-up. So I know some of you have already done the tune-up, others haven't. So as a member to SBSM, when we finish the first 12 weeks, you get access to that for free. And that's another way that you can practice. I will leave it at that. I want to bring Seth in. And one thing I will really stress and mention, I'm all about nervous system health, healing the nervous system, restoring regulation to it. And really what that means is full level functioning as a human, not living in survival mode, not being driven by our past stuff. I'm going to say stuff, because there's a lot of stuff that we hold, that we carry. And I look forward to a day, and I sure hope it happens in my lifetime, where the bulk, if not a very large portion of humanity, has more regulation, has solid regulation, whether it's through us as adults here doing the work, or it's via us adults or folks who haven't yet got into this work, working on their nervous system. So when they have kiddos and babies, those kids don't have to hang out and do things like this as adults. They can just live their life and have fun and do all the things that we humans can do. So without further ado, Seth, do you want to pop in and say hello? And maybe what is your definition of nervous system health? And then we'll get into Q&A.
Sure, sure. Hey, everybody. Good to see you. So yeah, it's interesting because there's so many things that people struggle with that they may not have an awareness that is rooted in the nervous system and how it is functioning or not functioning well. Things that may be as subtle as, I feel nervous when I get into an elevator, or, if I'm in a group of people, I feel shy and I have trouble sort of speaking my truth. I have a tendency to go along with the crowd. It can be subtle things like that, that we may think, oh, that's just my personality, right? Well, actually, any sort of lack of fullness in the expression of your being and the expression of your authentic self, even not maybe knowing what your authentic self is, all of that is rooted fundamentally in what's happening in our nervous system. I talked yesterday about understanding the neurophysiological platform, what is underneath our brain, what is underneath our thoughts, our consciousness, and the kind of thoughts we have access to, the parts of our brain we have access to. All of that is governed by what's happening in that autonomic nervous system. So if our autonomic nervous system is in fight flight and we're feeling the charge underneath the surface, that's going to make our limbic center of our brain like really firing a lot. And it makes it harder to access the neocortex, which is where we have access to critical thinking and creative thought, higher consciousness, higher forms of consciousness, you might say, that make us human beings. So it's vast, the amount of symptoms, experiences that we can have, and we may not realize that it's rooted in the nervous system. Now, there's other more obvious presentations. If someone's really rageful and explosive or is extremely anxious and can't leave the house, that's generally more recognized as like PTSD, and people are starting to understand that. But it's a wide range. So autoimmune disorders, things like I struggled with the chronic bowel issues, things like POTS, or having difficulty with your vestibular system. There's so many ramifications that happen over time as we're living with dysregulation. So for me, if I'm thinking about nervous system health, I'm thinking about, okay, that's living a life that is free of debilitating symptoms, where one is able to be in their truth, to speak authentically, to know who they are, and to show up in the world in a powerful way. It's really about being the fullness of yourself without these sort of handicaps that come from past trauma. So, and that was my journey. Like I talked a bit about yesterday, of just, being the hippie in the woods for 15 years. And that's just what I thought I was. That was my life. And then all of a sudden, this whole other chapter opened up, where I was able to actually step into more of who I was supposed to be, ultimately, where I could help other people, because I wasn't meant to just stay in the woods. So, that was part of my journey. So, and that's part of that fullness of self, fullness of expression of the self. So to me, that's really what it's about.
Thank you. Yeah. And for those, again, new here, Seth and I did a marathon of a conversation yesterday for 2 hours. Don't go away and watch that now, because I want you guys to stay here. But I rarely say something is really good. I think it was really good. And we've already had some of our alumni who watched that and something landed new for them. And that actually brings me back to this lifelong journey of this work. And then we'll get into questions. Someone's like, it was really good, all caps. This is a journey that when we say it might take a couple years, and it sometimes can. For Seth, he mentioned it took him 7 years to get to full nervous system regulation, the kind of regulation we want a person to have at the beginning, via secure attachment, safety, connection, allowing a kiddo to express themselves. But don't be afraid when you hear that word or that number 7 years, because in that 7 years, there were changes. There were shifts, there were massive improvements. Yeah. And remember, our system, we have capacity for so much learning, so much creativity, so much function. And as I mentioned, most of us have never known that. Humanity hasn't even known that. So that's another reason why we formatted this such that, yes, it is an investment at the beginning. The price of the course is just under $2,000 US. And there is a payment plan, and that might seem like a lot at the beginning. And just know that that will keep you in this world of ours, learning and being able to connect for many years to come. Again, if I think about the individuals that I worked with one-on-one, they put a lot of investment into their healing. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt, the folks that have gone through Smart Body, Smart Mind, I don't want to say I've had better care because I did good work with them, but it's been more consistent and it's given them greater regulation. And another question that we sometimes get asked, and then we will get into the questions. And if you do have a question, put question on the chat just so that Bonnie can see that that is a question for us as opposed to maybe a comment. Often people ask, will Smart Body, Smart Mind be good for me if I'm at this point in my healing journey or at this point, or will it be good for this condition or this symptom or this XYZ? Usually, unless someone says, I have a broken bone, will it fix that? I think it goes without saying, no, go to the hospital, get it fixed. But then this work can help the healing process. Heck, this work can even help us from preventing getting into accidents, and that's true. But everyone is unique in where they are, and everyone has a nervous system, and we want that nervous system to be healthy and well. And so it's all about pacing yourself, knowing where you're at, knowing your limits, or maybe if you don't know your limits, learning what they are, because that's another sign of unhealed trauma, not knowing our limits, going too far, pushing too much, or maybe not pushing enough. That's a symptom of being in shutdown and freeze. So I wanted to mention that because that is something that gets asked quite a bit. Anything to add to that, Seth, before we get into some formal questions here?
No, I mean, that's pretty much it. You know, there's very little that this work can't help with. It's also not going to necessarily solve everything right away. That's another important thing to understand. Oftentimes people come into this work, not just this program, but this kind of work in general, with a set of symptoms, and they're looking for the specific things to resolve. And sometimes that happens, or sometimes that happens 6 months later. Right? Sometimes people come in and symptoms resolve right away, but then something entirely new pops up. So it's as we get into the system, it's like this onion that's continually peeling away, and we don't always know what that's going to look like. It's a process of discovery, and it really is, you know, a lifelong journey. It's about giving you a set of tools, a set of awareness, a set of knowledge that informs your entire life. So it's not just about resolving certain symptoms, but that being said, those symptoms do generally resolve. It's just not a linear line, a linear process. Usually, it can be unexpected, you know. And one of the things that happens a lot is, you know, many people who come in with symptoms that are related to freeze, well, okay, those may change, but then as they start to feel more and come out of that freeze and shutdown, oh my gosh, like now I'm feeling so much, right? And so that can be another experience that's really common, is people realize, wow, I really wasn't feeling much at all before, and now I'm feeling things that are really difficult, you know, including these activation, right? Experiences of activation. So, you know, that's also a good thing to understand going in, is that, yeah, you're gonna feel stuff that's difficult. That's the point. Is getting the capacity and the knowledge and the skills on board that you can feel those things. But yeah, not we got to step away from the idea we've been given that like this thing solves this problem. That's not how this work really works. Yeah.
And I'm going to get into, I saw a question that came up just a second ago, but I'm going to get to one that's up top, and then I'll blend in the thought that just came in from what you said, Seth. So this is a question for me, but it can be for both of us. I know this person asks, I know how important sequencing is when you have chronic illness. So sequencing is my way of saying we need to sequence how we heal. and what we do. My classic example, if you wanted to climb the Mountain Everest, not that I recommend it, but let's just say you wanted to do that and you had never walked around your block, it wouldn't work. You couldn't be put to base camp on Everest and summit the next day. I think that goes without saying. We need to sequence our fitness, for example. It's the same with the nervous system. And what has happened in a lot of the current fads of trying to biohack the system, and I did a talk on this a couple days ago on Wednesday, is that people are jumping into a desire to heal yesterday, and they're doing things too quickly, too soon, too fast, and then it actually creates more dysregulation in the nervous system. So that's what sequencing means here. So this person knows a bit about our work. So they say, I have been chronically ill for 20 plus years, chronic fatigue, adrenal fatigue, and housebound. And I know I have a dysregulated nervous system. Yes. I have multiple symptoms that are totally debilitating, and I am hypersensitive to everything. I feel as though I am beyond help and beyond hope. Can even the most sensitive of systems as such as mine be helped? And where would I even start, as I am burnt out? I'm a burnt out shell of emotional trauma. Thank you for bringing this info out. This is a lifeline for people like me. Where might someone like me start? So thank you for this question. And I'm going to acknowledge the fact that you're here asking this question. I think you do have hope. Now, you can challenge me on that one, but if you're here curious and you're learning, I am going to say that you probably have a little inkling of hope that you can heal this, and that's why you're here. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. I also know that when you are in this soup of intense fatigue and dysregulation and your body is in chaos, it can seem almost impossible to get out. And I know from experience that yes, you can. And you, the person, has to be actively involved and wanting to do it. It doesn't mean that you do 5 hours a day, gosh, no, but it might mean you do 5 minutes a day. And so we have had folks with the most sensitive systems, folks with intense complex PTSD and chronic fatigue and pain move out of this. Now, it doesn't happen in one day or 1 month, but it slowly starts to build. And so you start with little bits, excuse me, and making sure that you're listening to your system. We have had people who have been bedbound get out of bed and go from being bedridden 95% of the time to like being bedridden 20% of the time. I'm just remembering that from a story that someone shared. So yes, this can help. It has helped many people. And then of course, you, the person, has to engage in little bits. Seth, anything to add to that? I will add one more thing. The element that really is important for this level of dysregulation, it is the body work that we're going to be teaching you in SBSM, touching the system, connecting to the system with your own touch, starting to notice your little impulses. There's a pretty strong connection with this representation of ill health and early developmental trauma. It could have been in utero. It could have been when you were a little baby. It could have been from being allowed to cry yourself to sleep at night. And so the system is in absolute chaos and shutdown. It could be to abuse. So there's this level of illness is usually connected to deep early trauma. And we need to work at that body level because it's the body in those instances that is going into chaos and shutdown. Seth, do you want to add anything to that?
That's mostly it. I would just say, to address specifically where they ask, where would someone like me start? You start by first really learning your own capacity. One of the first things we teach is called follow your impulse, where it's about learning to really listen to and honor your unique system and where you're at. And that'll be the most foundational thing that's necessary if your system is in a place like you described, because the first thing is learning how to not do too much. So many practitioners in different modalities push on the system way too much too soon. And that's what you're going to want to avoid. So that'll be the first thing. That's where you start, is just figuring out how much can I genuinely take in. And then it's like determining your preference. Like Irene said, there's two different kinds of learning. There's the education and the theory, and then there's the neurosensory exercises. So maybe for you, you realize, wow, I can take in 15 minutes of education and be okay. And then, but oh wow, 5 minutes of that neurosensory exercise was too much, right? And start to identify for yourself how you're going to enter into the work and in what kind of dosage. And that's one of the great things about it being online in this format, is there's no one putting pressure on you, right? You're not in a session where you have to get your money's worth. It's like, do the amount that feels right for you in that moment and see how that settles. And that process itself will be, kind of a discovery, learning how much to do, and learning that for yourself in itself can be healing, right? That's connecting to your authenticity. So that's kind of how I would say you'd probably want to enter into it.
Thanks, Seth. Question here. Can you say something about brain fog that is coming to me again and again, and I can't quite nail it? So there's lots of thoughts on brain fog. And of course, I am someone who recognizes the importance of healthy food, healthy environment, healthy air, healthy water, making sure that we are getting enough nutrition of the good kind. Humans actually need a lot of fat in our diet, good fat. And I know that the brain is deeply impacted when we don't have good fats, because the brain is pretty much all fat. So that's one thing. But let's just say you are clean in your diet, you know all your blood markers are great, and there's still this fog. Typically, that's a sign from our work that there is a deep, deep shutdown on the system, this freeze, and it's limiting not just the blood flow, but the brain to be functioning as it wants to, because the rest of the system is being co-opted for survival stress. And so when we are still swimming in a soup of these survival energies, the adrenalized fight flight and the very deep shutdown freeze, the engine is strained, if I use that term. The body is strained. And so the brain is like, please, I'm trying to work here, but you're putting all this energy to these fear responses, but there's nothing there. But there is, in that it maybe is the perceived threat or an old threat that's still looping in your system, or a general sense of unsafety. So brain fog is definitely something that we see shift in folks, just like people will say, I have adrenal fatigue. That will also shift, and they in many ways go hand in hand. Seth, anything to add to that one?
Just to also understand the mechanism of the freeze response. Evolutionarily speaking, this is meant to protect us from the experience of death. So that's when it's supposed to come on. Now, like we've given the example before, when a baby is left to cry itself to sleep, its system learns very early on to go to freeze as a default response to stress. So this thing that is only supposed to happen when we're about to die becomes a go-to. And that mechanism greatly supports dissociation. You don't want to be present for the experience of being gnawed on by a lion, right? And that's how these responses evolved. So that freeze response encourages you to check out. It wants you to not be present, because that's sort of what it evolved to support, as well as reducing the blood flow to the limbs, all that other stuff. So it's just we see this connection very often between freeze in the system and this brain fog or tendency to dissociate. And like Irene said, also, yes, there can be multiple factors.
Yeah.
So, look.
The other thing I'll add in there is, and this is not covered in the course, but it's something that I'm becoming more interested in, and I've done a few interviews with some experts, is the importance of humans getting into the sunlight. Because of our tech-heavy world, and many of us are working from home, we're not doing our traditional commute anymore, where you walk out the door kind of yawning and I'm trying to wake up, but there's that sunlight that actually presents a cascade in the brain to bring on alertness. And then many of us are on screens late into the night, many right until we put our head on the pillow. And that is also impacting our hormonal and circadian biology. And I know from myself, and I know Seth also knows this, even though we have a regulation, when we've started to become more attuned to the sun, and I don't mean staring at the sun, just being in natural outside light, it does make a shift to the brain chemistry.
Yeah.
So I intend to bring a little bit of that into the program eventually, but the 2 interviews I've done, one with Sarah Kleiner and one with Carrie Bennett, are on my YouTube channel. We can pop them in here and you guys can save the links for later. I do believe that that is a very important part of healing our nervous system. And it's very cultural and it's also biological. If we are in a shutdown, there is a tendency for us to want to hide inside and not go out into the world. And so over time, that limits our exposure to the sun. It lowers our vitamin D levels, which is very important for hormonal health and the immune system. And there's kind of this cascade that happens. So I just wanted to put that one in there because I know that the nervous system health is essential. And then there's these other little branches. Next question. I learned that it's important to take it slow with this work and listen to myself, but I'm afraid that my old pattern of being a brave student will get in the way and I will be even more exhausted and hyper. Any tips? So I'll just tackle this one very, very directly. You will probably struggle with this, and your job is to notice when you're trying to be that brave student. Your job is to notice when you're not following your impulses. Your job is to notice the patterns. I would say that, and this is just a number I'm picking right now, 50% of the learning in this course is breaking the pattern of how you engage with something new.
Yeah.
And at the beginning, if you do join us, I'm going to say on our first orientation call, so I'm letting the cat out of the bag, don't get excited about the course. And I kind of use that as a joke. I want you to be engaged, but a lot of us get into new things with a sense of excitement, but it's often survival stress. And we can only sustain that raw, I'm in it for so long, and then we crash.
Yeah.
So I would much rather you treat this course like you're doing your teeth brushing every night. It's just something you got to do.
Yeah.
Got to drink some water. Let's do a little exercise. Yeah. And if you can shift that, it makes it more sustainable and you won't get exhausted.
Yeah. And also, can I add, specifically what you'll want to do is learn to notice the felt sense of the good student. What is happening in your body when you are in I'm being the good, brave student mode? What are you doing with your breath? What is holding, right? You start to learn to notice the somatic cues associated with a behavior or mindset. And then you pick up on those, right? Like, oh, wait, my butt muscles are clenching, whatever it may be, right? And then that's your cue, right? So that's another specific in terms of how is you got to start to notice what is happening somatically when you're in this mode.
Thank you. All right, question. This was from yesterday that we didn't get to. Has there been any research completed on the loss of a twin while still in utero? If there is, I'm not aware of it. You'd have to search on PubMed for that. My twin was miscarried and curious if this I'll start that again. My twin was miscarried and curious if this may have been the onset of my dysregulation, along with the diagnosis of complex PTSD, autoimmune, a sort of snowball effect. So I don't know the rest of your history. And I will say, if you were growing in mama's belly with another human growing and that little one dies and miscarries, that is a huge hit to your system because you have been in an environment adapting and being with this other being, and then they're in distress, no doubt, and then they perish. The miscarriage, if it was a true miscarriage, is highly traumatic to the system, and then mama is going to have massive loss and massive stress and all the things that come with that. So while you are in utero, you are then experiencing what we would call developmental trauma. And that is a huge hit to the system. And it can be worked with. So it definitely can be this dysregulation and these symptoms that you've mentioned. And then of course, other things that may occur once you do come out and you're post postpartum. So Seth, anything to add to that?
No, that's it. I mean, you nailed it. That is a significant real loss.
Yeah.
And yeah, you have to look at the conditions that were present for that to happen in the first place, and then all that came after for that, with that, for the mom. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Next question. I have 24/7 chronic pain. Is this something that could work for me? You want to take that one, Seth?
So yeah, this is again that kind of symptomology, usually rooted in early developmental trauma, or dysregulation that's just gone on a very long time. One of the things about pain is there's many different kinds of pain, right? I mean, there's the acute pain you get when you cut yourself, but when we're talking about this kind of chronic pain, that's generally related to just an overall distress, alarm bells going off in the system. A lot of that pain can be actually related to the system bracing against underlying sensations and emotions. There's a quote from Peter Levine where he says, pain is blocked sensation, which is pretty profound. And again, that's not always the case, but when we're talking about this kind of pain, that's usually what's going on. There's an experience, an emotion, a sensation that's wanting to happen in the system, or many such things. And the system is constantly like trying to lock that all down and stop it from moving through. And that's actually the source of the pain. So, when again, entering into this work with that kind of symptomology, it's about going very, very slow, developing your curiosity and capacity to start to get into what may be happening underneath the pain. There's specific practices that we teach too, specifically for working with pain. So, there's specific things about pain, but just overall, it's going to be about slowly growing that capacity to understand and feel what's trying to happen that the system is bracing against constantly.
Yeah. And then the other thing I will add to that, and I did cover this in my talk on Thursday on, I forget the title, but it was about early trauma and adult onset disease. It was a good one. And I read some passages from one of the books that's kind of one of the Bibles. And this person was quoting the Dr. Robert Scare, who wrote Trauma Spectrum and the Body That Bears the Burden. And his hunch, and this was a hunch years ago, and we now know this is most likely the case, is those with this level of chronic pain, we might call it fibromyalgia. He has a sense that it's, again, early developmental trauma, where there was no memory and the system learned to cycle between high levels of sympathetic charge and high levels of shutdown. And the other thing that occurs when you're in that, you are not getting proper rest digest, which is a part of the parasympathetic nervous system. It's part of the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is also responsible for the shutdown, by the way, right? This is the distinction that you'll learn deeply in the course. But when you're not getting good, yummy, restorative sleep and rest, the body is not recovering. And so the tissues lose their elasticity. The nutrition can't flow back and forth. The waste products can't excrete through the kidneys. The system isn't detoxing properly. The system is in stagnation, as we would say in Chinese medicine philosophy. There's no flow. And so that's the other element, is we're in this high level of stress and shutdown, but we're also not getting the good repair. And then this is where autoimmune comes in. This is where cancer comes in. This is where damage of the vessels of our arteries come in, where heart disease comes into place. You see? This is where we're always getting sick, or when we do get sick, it takes forever to recover. It's because we're not getting this good rest digest. It's the same with the gut. The gut repairs every single night the lining. And if we're not going into that rest digest, the gut will not repair, and then it won't be able to absorb nutrients. And then this is where leaky gut comes in. So it's such a simple question, and yet it explains so much. All right, next question. Can you give an example of how to deal with an emotion of fear or grief that comes with PTSD? And this person said, yesterday's call was amazing. So I'll speak broadly, and then Seth, maybe you can do a little bit too here. As I just said, when we have lots and lots of stress, in the case of someone with PTSD, the feeling of sensation and emotion are just tied all together. It's very hard to differentiate what from what. And that can make it very anxiety producing because we're not sure what we're feeling. And so one of the ways that we work with these emotions is to become more accurate at naming them and sensing them in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of counterintuitive to say classic emotional work where we might try to be with an emotion that's just kind of elusive. We're actually teaching you in Smart Body, Smart Mind how to be with this body, this organ system that is what creates the sensations that then create the emotions. Yes, they're interpreted in the brain, but they arise from our body, just like the gut sense is from the gut, right? Anything that you would add there about processing?
Well, yeah, I mean, so when we're talking about fear, grief, these big emotions, like you said, it is about learning to really get tuned in specifically to what is actually happening in the sensations in the body. Lots of times with things like fear and grief, what happens is a loop, because the urgency of the emotion drives thoughts that then produce more of the emotion. So this kind of positive feedback loop with negative consequences is what usually occurs. The way that we want to interrupt that is by becoming very clear about the sensations of the experience and not going into the thoughts about the feeling. Also, when we become clear about the sensations in the body of, say, fear, we start to fear the fearless, if that makes sense. Now, fear is really important if there's really something there that's scary. But if we're still scared from something that's 20 years ago that isn't present, it's not useful. So we don't need to listen to that fear. We need to learn to understand the sensations of it and uncouple the urgency. Kind of, it's like there really is nothing to be afraid of, but we can't really tap into that without this level of differentiation, where it's like, these are the sensations I'm experiencing. It's not just fear. It's, oh, my breath is short. There's tightness in my chest. I feel like a tingly on the back of my shoulders and my neck, whatever it may be, right? These associations. As you get specifically dialed into those, you also learn how to work with those sensations. So you become more skillful at having the experience of fear and then allowing it to happen at a body level and move through and to have a different experience. And same with grief, same deal.
Thanks. And then this will tie into the next question. I'll add another piece. Just for context, someone might be wondering, how come we don't have this? Because say there was trauma, but maybe there wasn't a big abuse. A lot of the ways, and we talked about this yesterday in our talk, Seth, but a lot of the ways that children learn how to be with their sensations via their parental controls, it robs them of feeling sensation when they've had a scare or they've had a boo-boo or they've had a fall. And by default, the way that, and again, I'm generalizing, parents will say, it's not that bad, suck it up, don't worry, or
You're
don't
okay,
cry.
you're okay, everything's fine.
No, they're not okay. If they're crying, they're not okay. And so that's, you're okay. Often it's a parent who has dysregulation and they're trying to tell themselves this is going to be okay. So there's also an element of when a child has an accident, the more regulated and calm you are, but you still go into action to help them and let them be with their body and their sensation, that grows that. But for so many of us, we never were given any opportunity to feel something bad and scary because we were told it didn't exist. There's no monsters under your bed. They don't exist. And yet the kid is feeling something there and they're not being validated. So this leads into the next question, which is, if you do the SBSM course, could you invite your kids to do some of the practical tools? It really depends on their age and if they want to. And I personally would never say to anyone in the course, invite your kids to do this work with you. If maybe you're listening to something and they walk through the room and they go, Mommy, what are you doing? Then you talk to them and you say, oh, I'm doing this course, right? But chances are a 2-year-old isn't going to do that. Chances are even a 3-year-old isn't going to do that. And a teenager might be just like, I don't know what mom's doing. She's doing something weird, right? But the kiddo might notice it. It really depends on where they're at. But I do not recommend, and I talked about this yesterday, I don't recommend that kids are forced to do an exercise of mind, body, attention. They need play, they need connection, and rather than having them do this course. Anything there, Seth?
No, that's it. Yeah. And it's possible that a kid at the right age might like get interested on their own. And if that happens, there's nothing wrong with sort of just talking a bit about what you're doing. And, like maybe they're, an 8 or 9-year-old and they're naturally somatically curious. I mean, kids these days are different than when we were kids. Many are much more advanced in their consciousness. And, so it's possible. But yeah, it's something that you would want to let them initiate. And, yeah, definitely not something that you would want to impose. Absolutely not. Yeah.
No. And then I'll add, there's always another thing to add, as you become more attuned to yourself and you start to see the world differently, as someone just wrote here, children learn by example. They'll feel if the field of your body is different. Wow, mommy's not getting mad anymore when daddy comes home or whatever, or mommy is able to actually ask me something as opposed to demanding it. And while they're not thinking it in that more cognitive way, they're sensing something's different, right? And so that will shift them automatically because they're connected to you, they're attached to you. Next question. I'm going through a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, which has brought up childhood sexual abuse, incest trauma that I did not know I had. I find this to be terrifying, and I'm currently feeling very unsafe in my body. Will the SBSM program help in a situation like mine? In other words, acute PTSD. So the answer again is yes. It's very similar to what we've been talking about, this ability to slow things down, to digest in little pieces, the sensations, maybe the memories. If you are still here, I'd be curious to know if was it completely spontaneous, or was there something that you were practicing that might have brought this up? So let us know. But yeah, again, this is back to being able to grow better capacity within your system and be with some of maybe the images that are coming through, but with connection in a very different way. Seth, anything to add to this, which I'm sure you do have?
Well, Kundalini is a very specific energy that's located at the base of the spine and can be activated sometimes accidentally through practices that are cathartic or too much. Sometimes, it can be activated intentionally. And if all is well, it's a joyous, empowering experience. When the system is dysregulated already, it's like running 1,000 volts through frayed wires. So that's what you're experiencing most likely, is this high voltage moving through the system that isn't, wired together that well because you had all these, horrific things happen when you were young. So just to understand that the intensity you're experiencing is normal given that sort of physiological system. Now, working with expanding capacity, that is probably going to be the biggest key in helping this, be like helping your container get bigger. Essentially, it's like right now all that energy is forced through this like little crack. So we want to help your system get more capacity, get bigger, be able to handle that energy and integrate it more. And there's many ways in which that can happen.
Awesome. Thanks, Seth. And for those that know a little bit of my analogies, this is that swimming pool beach ball analogy, right? Some of you heard me talk about that, where if we have a pool that has so much stored trauma inside of it, and the pool is really small, it's going to be very rigid. And like you said, you add something to it and the pool just goes pop, right? So this ability to gently open up the awareness is super duper important. All right, next question. How can this help with resistance that comes up with hypnosis, affirmation, and meditation? How can this work help with resistance that comes from hypnosis, affirmations, and meditations? Do you want to take that off the bat, Seth?
That's interesting.
Mhm.
Huh. So like you're doing so I'm understanding like you're maybe doing an affirmation or a meditation, and then like this big resistance pops up of like, no, or I don't want to do this, or if that's right, I mean, if you can clarify, I think that's what you mean, is that you're doing these practices and then you're having this big resistance arise. Yes. Okay. So yeah, the most simple answer is because often those practices are trying to impose a state that is not actually what's happening for you, right? If you're trying to impose this calm visualization, if you're trying to achieve this state of meditation or do this breath work that's getting you into your body all in a different way, all of a sudden, all of that can push on the system or be misattuned to where the system is actually at. This is why we say, we would never ask kids to learn to meditate. That's generally not where their system is at. They want to play and run around and have fun and, be connected to and do art and be creative. If we're living with dysregulation and trauma, our system isn't at a place of Zen. So trying to impose that is just like friction. It's creating this like backlash, because it's like, hell no, that's not what's going on. Right. So those practices, when we have dysregulation and trauma, are generally going to produce this type of experience. And then what's unfortunate is people think there's something wrong with them. People think, oh, I suck, I can't meditate, I can't do this practice, right? It's like, well, that's because it's not attuned and matched to where your system is at. You need different practices that allow you to be with what's actually occurring. And that's what this work is.
So that goes back for this person's question. At the top, I mentioned you would never want to climb Everest if you haven't walked around the block. This is that.
Yeah.
Right? Meditation is a high level consciousness exercise. It's really working at a high refined level. And there's been a disservice, I believe, from the bits of research that have come out that have shown that, these Buddhist monks have way better ability to calm their brains. It's like, well, of course they friggin' do. They live in a monastery without traffic, and their food is clean, and they're in clean air, and they don't usually have kids running around, demanding things. Like they're in a completely different world. And meditation is something that we can strive towards. I didn't start, and Seth can verify this, I didn't start really working with my energy and spirit and meditative practice until this year. Right? And it wasn't because I didn't want to. It's like I still had a lot of trapped stuff, even though I was functional and regulated, that needed to work through. And then when I can, now it's just like, it just comes so much easier. Our ability to manifest becomes so strong when we're biologically connected to ourselves, because it means we're connected to the environment. And it means we're connected to, we could call the energetics of the universe way more. We become more psychic when we get more biologically sound. I believe that's something that we all have access to. So yeah, not anything wrong with you. It's just that your system needs that base level regulation first.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a longer question here, and we've touched on this, but I'm going to read it and then we'll unpack it. So I experienced birth trauma, pre-birth trauma, birth trauma, medical trauma, and physical, sexual, and verbal abuse, all before the age of 4. Multiple near-death experiences as well by the abusers too, and since have had many traumas, both big and small, for 32 years. Every year, including multiple traumatic brain injuries as recent as a year ago. I have seen over 100 providers and specialists for physical and mental health, including holistic modalities. I've had more than 30 diagnoses of chronic illnesses, autoimmune and mental. I'm dedicated to my healing. That's the key here. And doing SBSM, and have made some small progress with your content, your free content. However, I've been told by 2 different somatic teachers, both psychologists, that someone with my amount of early trauma, abuse, and neglect don't stand as much chance to heal opposed to someone with less stored trauma and stress.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah. Bad therapist that said that to you, by the way. It makes me mad that someone said that to you. I'm going to be a bit protective there. What can I realistically expect or set as a healing intention with SBSM? And will I ever be able to function again? Until 6 years ago, I was able to manage a successful business.
Mm.
Here it comes. Drive, have friends, and now I have no capacity.
Yeah.
So my overarching answer is, this is a common thing we hear, believe it or not. You're not alone. And the fact that you're here and you have hope and you want to set a healing intention is what you need. The system wants to be resilient. It doesn't want to hold this stuff within. And again, this work that our main mentor, Kathy Kane, has figured out, branch of SE, it is really the gold standard for working with early trauma. I can say that quite like solidly. Mm-hmm. And so that is a big difference in this program. Or if you were to work with someone one-on-one who is very skilled with this. Now, these somatic teachers that said that it's not very possible to heal, it's just possible that they have not come across this level of learning and healing because it's still quite new. What you mentioned about having a successful business and lots of drive, that was your survival. That was your fight, flight, keeping you going. You were in a functional freeze like nobody's business. But then the system can only keep going at that clip for so long, right? Can't go at Mach 10 for like a flight from here to across the ocean. Like you can only go a little bit and then it'll break down. So that's probably what was going on. And then Seth, please add something other than, yes, this can work. And it's all about taking your time and pacing yourself.
Well, that's, I mean, that's mostly it. And, you know, one thing I'll point out, so yeah, you were in functional freeze. That's how you were doing it. That's how you were running the business and being able to do that. And that's not sustainable. However, that points to your level of capacity. Mm-hmm. There's a little cue in there about the kind of capacity you have once you start to unpack this stuff. You have a lot of capacity, tremendous capacity.
Yes.
If you went through all of that and you were able to run a successful business, even if you're in functional freeze mode, that shows that you have a tremendous spirit, tremendous courage, tremendous capacity within yourself. So you absolutely can heal these things. You're going to have a lot of patience. You're gonna have to go slow. You're gonna have to recognize that, like, you know, all the years of achievement that you had set you up for some difficulties here. Mm-hmm. And so you need to take time and give yourself that time. But you absolutely can heal. I mean, I do not believe there is anybody who, given the right support, practices, tools, cannot get very much better. Will you ever be able to be the person that you would have been if none of these things had ever happened? No. You're going to be someone else. You're going to be who you are after you have transmuted and healed these experiences. Mm-hmm. So it absolutely can be done. And it just is going to mean going slow, having a lot of patience for yourself.
Yep. Your soul is strong. I'm going to say that
strong.
one.
Very strong.
So use that strength in your soul to heal and do this work. I will add one devil's advocate to Seth's mention that everyone can heal. It's true. You have to want to, though. Yeah. And then there are, and this is a very extreme, if anybody knows the work of Bruce Perry, he has worked with and seen children whose neglect was so severe that they have to be institutionalized. If true. You are here reading and you can nod as I nod and clap as I clap, I know that seems really remedial. You have the social engagement to do this work. The kind of kids he was working with or seeing were the one, like they were literally put in kennels and cages and not interacted with. Yeah. I don't think that would be able to get helped with this work because their function was just never wired at all. Yeah. And that is heartbreaking, but that's just the truth. Next question. How does this course help and address people who are intuitive empaths? Being an empath, my nervous system is overloaded. Seth, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, so that's a great one. We hear that a lot. We are all empaths, every single one of us. We are born empathic. It's a natural human function. Now, what happens is either it is supported or it is not supported. It is overstimulated or overdriven. So we're all empathic. So it's not a disability or anything wrong. What happens is when that natural empathy meets with survival stress and trauma, and we don't shut down, we stay in activation, then that empathy becomes like a burden. It becomes, we're feeling way too much. The reason we're feeling way too much, though, isn't because we're empathic. It's because our natural empathy has been hijacked by hypervigilance. So it's empathy on steroids. It's, I must scan this as much area as possible all the time to feel as much as possible so I'll be safe. And it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel like you're safe. I know, because I've been in the same kind of situation. This is why when I was, in my period of living apart from the world, I could go to town, but like for a couple hours only. And after that, it was like I had to flee because I just was feeling everything so intensely: the electricity, the concrete, the people, the fluorescent lights, whatever it is, right? So it's empathy on steroids when it meets trauma. So again, it's about restoring regulation, coming out of those survival responses. When that happens, the empathy that you have becomes a beautiful tool. Like, I couldn't do the work I do with my clients in private practice to the level that I do if I didn't have that strong empathy. That's one of the foundations of this work when you're working with a client in person, is feeling what's happening in their system. That's how you know how to respond. So it can become a beautiful gift. It's just right now it feels like a burden because it's connected to survival.
And then the final thing I'll add there is as we learn to have more regulation, we also learn to have better boundaries. Energetically, relationally, we express no, and we don't push, we don't override our system, which can be very common in those who are empathic and they want to help, but you still have to help yourself and know those boundaries. This is also indicative too of if anybody here has chemical sensitivities. This one can be also very hard, and that's something I have worked with and I'm healing personally right now. But we also want to have a radar in our system for things that are toxic, chemically speaking. And so there's a difference between our system going into hyper reaction when we're exposed to something that isn't good for us, as opposed to, whoa, I'm smelling something, this isn't what I want, I have to move out of this situation, in a more conscious perspective than the system going into complete dysregulation when we're meeting something that's not good for us. So it transfers to that too. What part does the amygdala play in nervous system regulation? A psychologist many years ago told me anxiety is a problem within the amygdala. I'll start by saying, in our line of work, we see anxiety not as anxiety, but as stored survival stress and a sense of vigilance, threat. The amygdala, yes, is part of this brain of ours, but it's just a part. And so the nervous system feeds the amygdala, and then the amygdala feeds the system. And so, yes, and we actually, not once in all of Smart Body, Smart Mind, do I say amygdala, limbic brain. Yeah, never, it's never mentioned.
No.
So, Seth, anything to add there?
Not really. It's an important part of the function of survival, but it's just a part. It's a part in the brain that responds to sort of discerning, is this a threat? Is this not a threat? And when we've experienced tons of trauma, it gets stuck on this is a threat mode, kind of as a default. So, that's kind of the function that's happening there. But yeah, it's the overall autonomic system that's really driving the bus of that anxiety. Yeah.
And there are many ways of working that will say we're trying to retrain the limbic system, we're trying to retrain and rewire the brain. Again, you'll notice I don't ever say we're trying to rewire the brain. in this work. We're trying to restore regulation, and we're rewiring the entire system, how the entire system connects also with the environment, right? We're more than just the cell. The cell makes up the body, but we need to work with the whole body. Next question. What is the difference between needing rest and shutting down? Seth?
Well, needing rest is a natural part of life, right? And we may know that, like, especially if we exert ourselves, go for a hike or do some form of intense exercise, you need a little bit more rest. That's very different. Shutting down, well, one, it's a survival response, and it feels very different than needing rest. It's like more like getting hit with a ton of bricks, like super sluggish, can't get out of bed, or like I can't keep my eyes open no matter what, or dissociating, checking out, all of those types of things. That's a very different thing than simply needing rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing that will come up for those of you that do join us in SBSM is you might start doing one of our exercises and you actually know that you had a good sleep. And then all of a sudden you'll be like this.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things we get a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like, I'm really tired all of a sudden. What's going on? And often what that is, it could be one of two things. You could be really tired. And my lessons do have a way of lulling people into sleep if they really are tired, but they will also say people will be watching one of the videos and they'll find that they're getting tired. And that's a defense mechanism. The system is wanting to shut down because it's too overwhelming.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's one of the things we say really early on, is really start to notice those cues. Like when we talk over and over and over and over again about going at your own pace and figuring out what that is, that's what we're talking about. Like if you're 5 minutes into a practice and all of a sudden you can't keep your eyes open, that means stop. Right? That means your system is getting pushed on in a way that is different, and this freeze response is coming up to try to protect you from that. So.
Or you might just be tired too. And the lesson has given you a connection to your body and out of your brain, which also happens. This is very common. And you'll just have like a nice little nap. Yeah. Because you've been guided into the body, and then it lets the monkey mind settle. And then that monkey mind that's driving your survival more will kind of take a side seat. Yeah. Next question. This is in reference to something that was mentioned yesterday in our chat, Seth. So it was very interesting yesterday about some kids biting the therapist. So this was a context to our lovely teacher and trainer, Steve Terrell, who teaches the early somatic work. He pretty much exclusively works with kids who have been adopted or adults who were adopted. And he would say that, I've had the case where I've been working with a kiddo and they come out of freeze. Yeah. And they take a bite out of my arm because I'm, maybe working with their head or something. And that is actually what he wants. He wants them to display the fight, that impulse. So the person asks, what if you have adopted a child and that biting, what if you have adopted a child that is biting sometimes in frustration? Is it to find a way for the child to release the anger in another way? Yeah. Yes.
You got it. And if they're young, it sounds like that's where you really want to bring in play. And things like I talked about, pretending to be, what kind of big animal would you be if you could be? What kind of dinosaur would you be? What kind of sound do you make? How would you move? And modeling for them, stomping or like or whatever, like getting into that spirit of play where you can channel some aggression. Or hey, I bet you can't push me over. This is a great one. If you stand in front of the bed, the parent, and then say, I bet you can't push me over, and then make them work at it, but let them win, and you fall onto the bed. You got me, and let them, wow, you're so strong, really supporting their strength, their aggression to come out in these playful ways that are about connection, right? So that's that. You just want to find different outlets for it.
That's great. There was a time, actually, this was a few years ago, where I was moving through some of my fight. And when Seth and I would be on a walk, I would like push him
Yeah.
and he's much bigger than me, and I'd be like, eh, and it was just part of something in my impulse was like, I need to push you and like, grr, right, exert
Yeah.
strength. So this isn't just for kids. This also can
Yeah.
happen in adult relationship too. Of course, you need a person and a partner who's willing to play with this
Yeah.
and such. But this is why, again, why imagine if this kiddo was told to try to meditate
Yeah.
and calm themselves down. That's just, it's a disaster waiting to happen. It's so important to harvest and harness this healthy aggression. Okay. Oh, this is a perfect one to lead into this. I have noticed I get very triggered by attempting deep breathing exercises. Even when being guided by a counselor, my legs get shaky and alarm bells start going off in my brain as if to say danger is imminent. You're exactly right.
Yep.
It makes me feel like I'm wired in reverse or something. Is this a typical trauma response when attempting to relax?
Yes. So what's happening there? One, the lungs hold a lot of emotion. Grief and anger are two big ones that can hang out in the chest and the lungs. So intensity, right? Big loss, big anger, big rage, all that stuff tends to hang out in the lungs. So your practitioner is asking you to breathe deeply. What is happening? You're expanding those chambers. You are making room for that survival energy to emerge. And that is what you're feeling in your legs. Right? We don't really do any practices like that. We do work some with the breath, and with the system we call the diaphragms, which is about exploring these chambers. And we do use the breath, but it's not about like forcing air, being like deep breaths. No. It's like use your natural breath, see what it's like simply to direct it to a certain area, be curious about what you find, and knowing that this is likely what you will find, right? You need to be prepared that when you do these explorations into different parts of the body, we are going to find stuff. And then, so for example, what we would say, and we wouldn't have you do the deep breathing in the first place, but say you do that and you said, like you say, you start to feel alarm bells going off and you feel your legs feel all jittery. I think that's what you said. Then, okay, stop the breathing. What would it be like to let your legs start running? Let your legs start moving that energy that's coming through, because that's a fight flight response that you're unpacking. So your practitioner is guiding you into these things thinking they'll calm you down, it sounds like, without understanding of trauma and nervous system physiology. So
yeah. And I'll add, we have to give these people the benefit of the doubt because they just haven't had time to understand this information. It's still quite new, even though we've known about these responses for a long time. So just want to, say they probably don't know.
yeah.
And there are some, just to add, in the Smart Body, Smart Mind curriculum, not in the 21 days, but there are some breathing neurosensory exercises that are Feldenkrais based. So one of my parts of training is the Feldenkrais method. And so as Dr. Feldenkrais would say when he was alive, do nothing that resembles breathing, but we're going to breathe. Yeah. And so rather than these, things which have a place, right? There's a place for breath work, but not with nervous system regulation and healing trauma. Rather than these very big extremes, it's guiding the breath into different parts of the body, feeling how the belly rises or how the chest can rise, feeling the end of the exhale and not forcing anything, but getting to know your system in a way that is gentle as opposed to this big brute force of breath. Because my sense is with a lot of the breath work that's done, it's not done with any foundation. Just like a lot of folks who go in to do therapy or EMDR or EFT or all the other things, they haven't spent 3 months learning how to track the sensations in their body. The other thing I'll add, the education is super important because when you know these things and you're sitting there in your therapist's office, because there's nothing wrong with having a therapist, for example, or a counselor or whatever, but you can then say, oh my goodness, this is the survival response that I'm feeling. I need to be with this. I need to pause what we're doing right now so I can let this move through. If you don't have that knowledge, of course, now all of you do, but if a person doesn't have that knowledge on board, this is where the system can fracture or go into more shutdown. And that's what we see happening over and over again. And that's why a lot of people will say, as the individual did above, I've seen 100 practitioners, I've seen 70 practitioners, I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on all these retreats and medicines and and I'm still struggling to sleep at night. I still have bowel problems, and it comes down to this piece.
That's right.
Okay, next question. Any words or ideas for adult children who are doing this work on how to interact with their parents around it? I'm in my 40s and I decided to come back where I grew up. I fled from as soon as I could. And I've come back to live with my mother for a while as I go through a divorce from a marriage that was traumatic, but actually led me to finding your work. This work helped me leave, but at this point in the process in my healing, I'm dependent on my mom financially and living with her, and often getting activated by her about our shared traumas. I want her to know that I'm not just crazy or lazy. She wants to help, but not sure the best way to talk to her. You have more experience with the parental trauma piece. So Seth, what would you say to this person?
So it's hard to know without a little bit more detail, like exactly what to do, but there's some general principles that you can definitely follow. So one, don't be too specific, like don't get jargony. Like don't start talking about the nervous system and the fight flight responses and all that, unless like your mom is really curious and wants to know, then great. But for a lot of people who discover this work, they can then kind of have a period of kind of zealotry about it, where like they really want to share and they have all this knowledge, right? And so you get excited and you want to talk about what you know, about what you're learning about yourself. But for the person listening, that can be like totally overwhelming if they don't already know any of this stuff. So give yourself permission to be kind of general. I'm working on myself, I'm working on healing, this is what I need. Be very clear about what you need, know what you need. Maybe you need to be able to have the freedom to go into your room and lock the door and know that she can't come in, and that is your space in which you get to heal and really go into these practices, and set the intention that when you come out of your room, you are now, okay, I'm maybe going to put a wall up a little bit. I'm maybe going to be a little less sensitive, or whatever is necessary for that relationship. So it may be important while you're living there to have a bit of a compartmentalization around your healing. It's hard to know for sure without knowing your mom, but if she is interested in a sort of general way, then I would say the best thing to do is, rather than you trying to explain it to her, just share some of Irene's videos, share some of Irene's material on YouTube with her and say, hey, well, if you want to, learn more about this, this is a good video to check out, and there's so many on there. I'm sure you could find one that's relevant to your situation, so those are my thoughts, is have some boundaries around the work and around what you share. Don't be overly detailed, overly vulnerable, and have a safe space for yourself that's agreed upon. That like, hey, when I'm in my room with the door closed, I don't want you coming in or knocking unless there's an emergency, because this is where that's my sort of my chamber for healing, right? Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Seth. Next question. I'm a 64 single woman dealing with anxiety and depression, daily activation and hopelessness, adoption and developmental trauma, feelings of negative thoughts, all rose to an extreme level after being triggered by many life changes, isolation, healthcare scare, and an operation last year. I'm finding a bit of relief from internal family systems that started 9 months ago, and meditation, and it's mediation, but maybe it's meditation. But feeling this daily consistent regulation of your course may be necessary to fully heal. So I'll answer that first. So yeah, again, I mentioned at the top of, if you were here at the beginning, I'll just reiterate, there's nothing, I think going and having a good therapist is wonderful, but there is this thing of learning daily little bits. I always use the example of, if you as an adult wanted to learn a second language, and I'm sure some of you have done that, it's going to happen with consistent daily practice. It's very hard if you're just doing 1 hour of learning a week. There needs to be a little bit every day so that you're building your vocabulary, you're hearing things differently. So there is something lovely about that daily capacity to go in to our program site. That's where everything lives, and just do a little bit. And again, listen to your pace, feel that. So I do believe that that would be helpful. Your next piece was, I'm always dealing with protective parts of me not wanting to heal, self-sabotage and negative hopelessness. Will your talks, will your program address any of these issues? I do struggle with trying to heal too quickly. So yeah, the sabotage, the negativity, the protective parts not wanting to heal. Again, if we were brought up in a situation of torment, chaos, unsafety, the world is a dangerous place, and we've gotten really good at being in our bodysuit, wired to protect, that can be cozy. It can be like, I know this is what I'm used to. I know how to function in this state of dysregulation. And so there is a weird energetic that occurs when we start to shift, where something in our unconscious goes, don't do that. We don't know what's on the other side because we've never lived with regulation. And that, believe it or not, is called fleeing from health.
Yeah.
We will find ways to stop our healing because that old pattern is so deeply grooved. Anything to add to that, Seth?
You nailed it. I mean, not too much. It's understandable, these things that want to protect you from healing. Well, yeah, it's because it's scary. Like, that's one of the fundamentals of trauma, is that all novelty is potentially threat. Anything that's new is kind of scary just because it's not known. And so it's, loving yourself there, accepting yourself there, while also challenging yourself there, is pretty important. There can be like this love-hate relationship with these parts of ourselves, where either we totally succumb to them and follow their every whim, or we like hate ourselves and have negative self-talk and like beat ourselves up because of it. We actually need to find a middle road of like, yes, okay, I hear you. Of course you want to keep me safe, and thank you. And yet, you're living in the past a bit, and we need to work on this. And it's like loving yourself and challenging yourself at the same time. And also, again, a lot of this comes down to practice with the felt sense. When you can understand the sensation, when you can feel in your body that protector self, then you can feel something else in your body that protector self can experience, right? We do this thing called pendulation, where it's about moving awareness through different areas of the body or different kinds of experience, through the sensation and an image, or the environment, the internal, the external, many ways of working with the system to kind of loosen up these things that are very bound as a way of management. So, yeah.
Thank you. Next question. I have dealt with breathing issues and tightness in the chest and throat for over 10 years. No doctor could help me. Do you have any idea where this could be from? So I have some ideas, and then I'm sure Seth will, if I don't cover all the things that we might think of right now. So as Seth, if you can recall, a few questions ago, he talked about how the lungs can store a lot. And when we are faced with, let's say, a trauma or something scary or something that shocks us or terrorizes us, or maybe we've choked on something, or maybe we've had some trouble breathing in a swimming pool and we think we're about to drown because we gulp a little bit of pool water and we go into a bit of a panic. I'm just giving you some ideas because it doesn't have to be a big abuse. It could be something every day that we don't think about. But this gets trapped in not just the breath, but in the nervous system, and how the nervous system connects with the breath. That vagus nerve that everybody talks about is connected to the diaphragm and to the breathing apparatus. And so we want to come into these, we could say, breathing issues, tightness in the throat, by getting curious with the tightnesses, getting curious with how the breath is shallow, or how it might not expand. My curiosity is, do you have any memory of something that happened 10 years ago that was highly stressful, that maybe had nothing to do with your breath, but made you tighten up and hold in emotion? And it could be grief, it could be sadness, it could be terror, it could be anger. If we're holding in a big rage, that can shut down these areas, and then we get this tightness, because literally that tightness is us unconsciously holding it in, but we haven't made that connection yet. So if you are still here with this question, you could let us know if there is a thing that you know of. Anything to add to this, Seth?
No, you got it. Yeah, it's some form of stuck emotion, somewhere in the realm of terror, or rage, or grief, some one of those, most likely. And yeah, it could be from a big breakup. It could be from getting really sick. It could be, from a big life change of some kind, something that doesn't seem related immediately. Or it may have its roots in something, very long ago, like maybe a choking incident or something that for some reason got unpacked 10 years ago by some stressor or event. So
I think this might be the person. Sorry. By the way, if anyone's sending me a direct message, I'm probably not seeing it. So I'm glad I just picked this up. I think this is the person said, I had a stressful job, working a lot all week, and that's when it started.
Oh, there you go.
And I have a history of abuse. So
okay.
This is a great example. We have something in our adult life that is highly stressful. This often happens in university for a lot of people, grad school, a breakup, a death of a family member, something really intense. But what it's doing is it's triggering the early stuff that was never dealt with, and often we don't even know is there. That's actually how Peter Levine, founder of Somatic Experiencing, had his first client ever. Is she was in grad school and she had what we now would call fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, chronic pain. And it was the stress of grad school that instigated an old trauma of medical nature when she was 5 years old, where she was held down during a surgical procedure and wanted to run but couldn't, right? And she didn't have sickness throughout her childhood and teenagehood, but it was when a big stressor cracked her system open, and then all this stuff came flooding out. This is why a lot of medical doctors can, again, make the connection. And this, again, to give them the benefit of the doubt, they're not trained to know about trauma. No doctor is taught about trauma. And it's getting, hopefully soon we'll get this out there, but this is where you, the person, has to advocate and understand these things. And then a good doctor will listen, and they won't say that's impossible, right? A good doctor will allow your curiosity to be heard, and they'll be like, okay, well, let's figure this out, right? So yes,
but
great.
They may not, but they won't know how to help.
Exactly.
Right? Even a good doctor will, may listen to you and like, oh, that's, okay, yeah, but they won't know how to help.
Yeah.
Because this, needs nervous system trauma work. So. Yeah.
Next question. Have you had students in SBSM with Lyme disease? Yes. And have you had some have improvement in their condition? Yes. Actually, one of our students, Lisa Dennis, wrote a book called Unveiling Lyme. If you just type that into Google or Amazon, you would find it. Unveiling Lyme, Lisa Dennis, Dennys. And she was one of our first ever SBSM students. And she's also, I believe, an acupuncturist. So she was really healthy and working on her health. And she found that the nervous system work was one of the key pieces to expanding her capacity and working with all the old stuff so that her immune system could take the front seat a bit more and do what it's supposed to do, right? And of course, there's other elements to Lyme as well, but the answer is yes to that question. Next question, does SBSM touch on or provide any pathways for students to become practitioners of this work? So I am in the midst of doing this. So starting in October, we're doing the first round of what's called a beta program, where my alumni from SBSM who know they want to do this work professionally, some of them are already professionals in the health somatic healing world, others aren't, and they want to follow this. We're doing a trial run of a segment in October and November to test out some of the ideas that I have for training people to be proficient and able to do this work the way I do, Seth does, and our colleagues. It is more than just learning about, say, the principles of somatic experiencing, for example, or Feldenkrais. The work that I'm putting out to the world, and I did a video on this a few months ago, is going to be the scientuitive methodologies. That's a word I made up over 20 years ago, and I'm still using it. So scientuitive, we're doing a scientuitive educator beta program this fall. If that all goes well, we will then create a scientuitive educator training program that will be like the first level, kind of like the first year or two of med school, for example. And then if that goes well, the next level will be the scientuitive practitioner, where we will teach people how to do the work one-on-one with people or in group. And so it is definitely something I want to do, because I have been in these trainings for many years. I've been through them, and I see the pros and I see the cons. And I want to help build more practitioners in a way that is more foundational, more solid, we could say. So yes, and all of this, the requirement will be smart body, smart mind to be able to even apply. Right. And so that's the other difference, is I'm wanting to take people into this more professional realm who already have very good regulation and capacity, so that we can all have a common denominator, because many of our trauma trainings don't have that. And that's where it can be confusing when you see someone who is trained in something and they are incredibly dysregulated. Again, not their fault. It's just that the trainings aren't requiring people to have a baseline level of regulation to join, which I don't agree with. So that's my personal take on that.
Yeah.
Next question. I have several ACEs. So that's adverse childhood experiences scores, and sleep problems for over 10 years. It started with no sleep at all and then severe depression. So there's a pattern there: no sleep and then severe depression, fight, flight, and then shutdown. I have been to so many therapists, but nothing really helped with my sleep. I guess my system is in freeze and hypervigilance. Yes, you are correct. At the same time, I have so much hope that your program could help me doing little bits not to overwhelm my system again. Could you say something about that? We've been talking quite a bit about this. Anything that you would like to add that maybe we haven't added yet to this, Seth? Or just a review of what we've already said?
Well, just, yeah, I mean, it sounds like you already got a lot of awareness about what's happening in your system, which is awesome. So you've got a good entry point into this work. So the really important thing will be honing that sense of how much is too much, and really honoring that. Because yeah, you don't want to overwhelm your system again. It sounds like you're already in a place of doing a bit of a flip-flop between these two extremes of fight, flight, and freeze. And when that's happening already, that's complex. So we don't want to overstimulate the system too much, but we want to challenge it and work just enough. And that'll be the most important thing for you, is to just really cultivate that internal felt sense knowing of like, oh, this is too much. And sometimes that comes with also noticing symptoms. Like you may notice, oh, I keep on checking out, like, and I have to drag my attention back, or I find that I'm getting irritated, or I keep on looking away, or I'm feeling fidgety, or whatever, right? Just really learning to notice what are your cues for yourself and your unique system that this is enough for now. And then you just honor that, you know? And what will happen is, as you learn that and honor that, that capacity will grow. We have this natural ability that when we start listening to and honoring our systems, they want to heal, and they have an organic ability to do so. So when we give it that good support of attunement, that's really what that is, right? When we learn to listen to our felt sense and honor those internal signals, that is attunement. Very often it is giving ourselves attunement that we never got earlier on. And that is so beneficial to our system, which supports more capacity, etc.
Great. Next question. Why might it be that physical symptoms such as extreme tension in the throat, jaw, and face feel worse in the morning than when waking? I will answer this because this is something I deal with because of all the old traumas I'm recovering from, which are very much lots of shock traumas, just to share. Concussion and whiplash that I had almost probably monthly growing up as a kid due to my sport. And so, yeah, there's times where I wake up and it is very sore and very tense. For me, as I work through this, it's often at sleep at night, things are processing, things are maybe tightening up as my dreams take me through things. And then in the morning, there's like this grip. And then personally for me, it's feeling it, being with it, moving, getting into maybe some warm water, and not pushing against it. This is where the mind can actually be really important. It's like, oh, wow, there's a lot of tension there. Okay. And being with it and moving in a way that helps get the flow going again, but not ruminating on it as much as possible. And it can be hard when there's pain there. So that's one of the reasons why we can feel more of this in the morning is in our sleep cycle, we may have been touching in on these activations at night through our processing. Do you have anything to add to that, Seth?
I'm sorry, I was not paying attention to that last part, so I was responding to something in the chat.
Okay, that's okay.
Someone had asked what the felt sense was.
Ah,
So I was just explaining, it just simply means our ability to feel the sensations inside our body, often called interoception as well. It's just the internal feelings, literally.
Yeah. It's okay. I think I covered that question. So the other thing I will add is, and I haven't really spoken to this during our calls this week, but when we have held the felt sense or we've held emotions in or survival, or we haven't been able to act out a certain movement to protect ourselves, these are called implicit procedural traumatic stress memories that can live in the muscles, in the movement patterns. And so often tension can also be these patterns that aren't still quite sure how to get out. And again, part of this work is growing capacity, growing that swimming pool that I often say, so that there can be more flow, so these procedural patterns can start to come out. So that is part of that. Someone asked, is movement included? And I assume you mean in SBSM. Yes. The components that teach the Feldenkraisian methods, where I'm guiding you through movements of the pelvis and the head and the spine and all sorts of things, bring in movement. And then there are some bonus lessons that my colleague Elia teaches. They're recorded and they bring in Qigong and Tai Chi and very gentle, I say dance, but it's not dance like going to a club dance. It's much more guided movement medicine, really. That is wonderful stuff. Okay, we have a question coming up about the Fawn response. So curious to know how the Fawn response plays into this work in the nervous system. I have found I have an extremely difficult time learning and removing myself from an unsafe situation, even when I recognize that it is unsafe for me. Or I feel extremely deep discomfort and fear. My instinct is to submit, let whatever is happening, and then tolerate, suppress the discomfort. I've been making progress with this and advocating for my needs and boundaries. So the Fawn response is a little more higher brain, and that we're choosing in some ways to submit. It's in our work, in line of work, it isn't part of the big survival energies of fight, flight, freeze. It's typically a little more cognitive, but it still brings in the body. It definitely brings in the suppression. So it again, it's a strategy. It's an adaptive strategy that sometimes we have to bring in. Usually we learn it quite young. If we're in a family system where we have to be appeasing and please our parents, to be fed, to be loved, to be cared for, it can start quite early. But a little baby is not going to fawn. They will freeze, for example. Anything to add, Seth?
Yeah, I would say that Fawn is fundamentally rooted in the freeze response, in the sense that it is the numbing quality of the freeze response that allows us to tolerate that behavior. Like that's suppressing our authenticity and accepting abuse and just clamming up and tolerating the sensations of that. That is not a pleasant experience. That is not something that we are innately built to do. So we have to sort of recruit the freeze response in order to tolerate that in the first place. So that's the way in which I see it being connected to the freeze. Also, living with that freeze makes it harder to know our own power, to speak our own truth in the first place. So I see it like a correlation between an adaptive strategy of the mind and the freeze response sort of working together. And this is the kind of tricky stuff that, this is why this work can be so intricate and complex. Like, these are not the kind of things that mammals in the wild have to deal with, which is how these survival responses evolved. Right. So it's a very interesting thing when you throw a higher brain into this picture. We can do these very nuanced adaptive strategies that are rooted in a very sort of coarse survival physiology, but we can use them in a very refined way. It's fascinating.
Yeah. And that'll bring me into really understanding for everyone listening here, which you all are. We need our mammalian physiology to protect us.
Yeah.
Like, we're never going to say we don't want you to go into fight, flight, freeze if you have to. But what has occurred in the evolution of the human is we've created rules and conditioning and practices and parenting books and all these things that are trying to figure out how the human should be. When really, if we allow our bodies to be in the biology and these mammalian pieces, and then of course we still have to teach the way that we work in this world, things do fall into the place. But again, babies, kids are raised all differently. Even within the same family system, they might be raised differently. But if you were to go and see a mama bear here in Canada and a mama bear in Siberia, she's going to be treating her little cubs exactly the same, right? And they have to teach, protect, teach them how to hunt, all these things, and then they're off on their own. And so we're so much more complex. And yet we also have this simplicity. When we get the regulation back, the human brain starts to really tick over in a really good way. There's just a comment, and then I'll get to the next question. We'll go till 1 or to the top of the hour. That'll be 2 hours. And I think we'll end it there, you guys. So one person just commented, I appreciate this approach of listening to our impulses on pace. I've been to retreats where it's almost a badge of honor to have intense bodily sensations come up, headache, digestive, and then to keep going and told that we can handle more.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is I hope that this is starting to go away in the world of of human development and personal growth, because you get a bunch of strangers, even only say 50 of them, into a room for a weekend, and there's no groundwork, and it's just all these survival stresses banging off of the walls and each other, and you might feel really good because there's a lot of connection. Right. And that's like, oh, this feels so good. And you go into it, and then you're doing these cathartic things. And again, it feels good because there's probably endorphins and dopamine being released and oxytocin. But this pool of yours, this capacity hasn't been built. It's just shaken up the system. And then what happens? You go home, and often there's a crash. Often people come out of these retreats and they're more depressed afterwards because they had that hit.
Yeah.
Right. That opioid hit, literally, of connection. And then it hasn't been built in their environment. They haven't been taught how to connect to the environment, how to connect to themselves. So I hope as time goes on that these things will slowly start to shift, just like exposure therapy is starting to shift these days. For example, even talk therapy is shifting. All right. Next question. It's been said we're clawing back our energy, but we need to discharge survival energy like restless legs. How does this work?
I get that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's oftentimes in the context of this work, we talk about, we're releasing survival energy, discharging. But there's also this notion of like, we're reclaiming our energy. So how do these things happen together? Well, the way you can look at it is So there's the first law of thermodynamics, right? So energy is neither created or destroyed, it just changes form. When we have this life force in us, each one of us, what's happening with trauma is that life force is recruited into the survival energies, into the sympathetic system, into that extreme dorsal vagal system, the shutdown, right? So it's like you can think of the survival energy as boxes. What we're doing is we're opening those boxes and letting that energy out. That has an expression that may look like whatever. It may be sound, it may be movement, it may be that sort of classic tremor response, shaking, trembling. It may be that the legs need to run, or you need to like feel like what it might be like to punch or to make a face or growl or snarl. Who knows what the expression may want to be. But we're not really so much releasing the energy. It's like it's not going into the air. What we're doing is we're taking it out of that box of the survival, and we're infusing it back into our system as life force, as chi, as whatever you want to call it, prana, the energy that is what makes us go and tick. So that's how those things happen. It's liberation of that life force, so back into our system in a homeostatic way.
Thanks, Seth.
Yeah.
Next question. Since a few years ago when I got burned out, so I love how you guys are giving us these hints. So a few years ago, you got burned out. You've been having problems being inside with people. This means I get anxious in classrooms, libraries, therapy, dinners, coffee places, bars, etc. It's better when it's noisy than calm and silent. Seeing people outside is a whole different thing. I have no idea what this is about, but it makes it very hard to live. Wondering if SBSM can help with this. So the answer is yes, because this comes back down to there's something survival based that's in your system that is like, this is not safe, right? This is not safe. And it's better when it's noisy because it's meeting your activation. It's like asking that kid that's raging to calm down. Right. So there's something in your system, the burnout. So when we burn out, we've also got survival stress under that burnout that probably didn't get properly processed, as Seth just said, energetically. And so that stored survival stress is now under the shutdown. But in this case of being inside, it's like the walls are like maybe closing in on you. It's too unsafe. It doesn't feel safe. Whereas outside, there's air, there's nature, there's elements. So the short answer is yes, this will help because we're working at regulating the nervous system and growing capacity. Anything that you want to add to that, Seth?
Just, yeah, it's that makes a lot of sense. That, yeah, like when you're in, I can just picture it, like you say, like a yoga class would probably be the worst place for you to be, where like everyone is trying to be zen and calm in an enclosed space. And I imagine you would feel like, so it's like there is this fight flight energy in there, this activation that, like in a more casual kind of coffee shop, noise happening, people doing their thing. It's like, yeah, your system's kind of being met, but it's still in like this enclosure. So there may be some connection to being confined in some way that's going on here. For example, I was in an incubator for 6 months because I was preemie. For me, I had a paradoxical response. I actually like tight enclosed spaces as a result, because it felt like that was my safe bubble. But you could just as easily have the opposite response, where a sense of enclosure feels like a threat. So, there may be some correlation to confinement there.
Yeah, Seth and I have like opposing pieces there. I also was in a confined space in my childhood, and I need space. I need high ceilings to sleep. I can't be in a small little tiny house to sleep. It doesn't work, right? And so we're very different in that way. And it's just how our systems, prefer. Next question. Do you have any insight on whether existential anxiety dread is eased with nervous system healing? Yes.
Of course.
My hunch is that when we've been in a dysregulated state for so long, especially freeze and collapse, we are essentially living in a state of being faced with death. Yes, you are correct. So getting to a regulated state would shift our experience, but I want to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Existential anxiety is simply your own physiology projected onto creation. I mean, simply put, it's like the world creation itself is a threat, is dangerous, but that's just coming from the inside. So yeah, as you resolve that on the inside, the world and your sense of it will change. And, you know, that being said, there's areas of the world that are literally dangerous, for sure. So, you know, you don't want to be ignorant to that. But by and large, the earth is a pretty great place, with the majority of human interactions being ones of neutrality or kindness, right? There really isn't, despite what we're told often, that much threat for most of us, you know. So this sense that the world is very dangerous fundamentally is being driven just by the physiology, and your sense of it will undoubtedly change. That also has a lot to do with learning to connect to the earth rather than always the world, if you understand what I mean by that distinction. The natural world, the ground, the trees, the natural elements that innately support human physiology and wellness. Learning to orient more to that and less to the stressors of the built world is also part of this.
Thank you. So I know we're getting close to time, but
I saw a question come in twice that's really good. If we could get to it, is about why you can't lose weight or gain strength. Did you see that one?
No, I did not. I don't think I've gotten to that yet. Oh, here we go. Okay. So this person has already signed up for SBSM. I'm curious about why you don't lose weight and why you don't develop strength when exercising. Even if you do everything right, eat, sleep, and exercise moderately, has this something to do with the dysregulated nervous system? It definitely can. And what's interesting is that when we become more regulated, that rest digest piece starts to come over and tick over, because building muscle requires rest digest. When we exercise, when we strength train, we're actually breaking down the system. And so we need good regulation to build it back up. Same with losing body fat. We could say weight because we want to keep our muscle mass and bone mass, but body fat, we don't want to have too much on our body, except for healthy, you know, procreation and such, and hormones. But when the system is sensing that there needs to be protection, there might, you know, that we keep fat on us for famine, right? It's this protective response of, I might not eat for months, and therefore I have to keep these layers on me. But when we start to have more regulation, the system does start to find its regulation. The other thing is we might start to connect with what we're supposed to be eating better, right? We realize that what we've been eating actually hasn't been it is not satiating us. That's the other element here. Anything to add? Because I know this is something that you've worked with more than I have, Seth, for yourself.
Well, you got to look back at the origins of the ACE study, right?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Like that was how all this started, to a bit large degree, is why can't these people lose weight? Or if they lose it, why does it come back right away? That's freeze. That's conservation physiology. When the system is in freeze, it wants to hold on to every single calorie that it can because it thinks it's going to die. So it's very, very difficult to lose weight if your system is dominated by that. And likewise, that is the high tone dorsal vagal response, that freeze. That means the dorsal vagal branch of the vagus nerve it's revving up super high, whereas the rest digest is low tone dorsal vagal response. It means there's a gentle hum going through that dorsal vagal system that supports rest digest repair. When you have freeze stuck on that high tone response, you can't act. That's why you can't drop so well into that low tone response. It's not as available because it's stuck in that one mode. So yeah, all of that applies.
So this is a question in relation to Kathy's work. So this person asked, you mentioned Kathy King's work numerous times. So this is one of our mentors and colleagues, especially related to early trauma. Please compare the merits, wisdom, safety of SBSM versus working with a somatic practice therapist if one has significant early trauma. So 6-month in utero, near-death experience, birth trauma, unstable primary caregiver, rage, multiple other healing methodologies. with skilled practitioners have blown up my nervous system in terrifying ways that can take 6 to 8 months to recover. I feel like I had this question the other day, but maybe Seth, do you want to answer this from your perspective in still being in private practice,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how these are different?
Totally. It's hard to know for sure. It may be that for your unique system, one-on-one work is better. It really will depend on the situation, on the practitioner. If you have someone who's deeply trained in Kathy's work and you have access to them for regular sessions and you're feeling good about that, and if you feel like they're attuning to you very well, it may be that that's better. It's really hard to say for sure. The difference, I guess, with this work, specifically as it relates to early developmental trauma, is you have that agency of setting your own pace, of learning to understand your own system so that you don't push yourself too far. So there can be more of a process of self-discovery involved, where you're learning to attune to yourself in the way that that practitioner would attune to you, right? So that's why we say become your own medicine, right? So that's kind of the difference in it. As to terms of to what will be more effective, it's really hard to say for sure, because I don't know the practitioner or anything. But I would say if you're getting good results with a practitioner like that, then you could stick with that. If you feel drawn to develop some of that capacity and attunement with yourself, then you could explore the program. See how you feel drawn.
And then I'll add, there's another question. I think this might be from the same person, but I'm not sure. They said, safety is number one for me. I don't want to repeat a nervous system blow up. I don't know how to gauge how safe SBSM would be for me, especially without an attuned practitioner leading my individual process. So this is a real thing. And I wish I could say for sure, but I also will say, when we are working with ourselves and we're being guided to work with ourselves, we're really having to listen to our bodies internally. And in an interaction with a practitioner, there can be, and this isn't always the case, but a little bit of a performance desire to be good. And if there is attachment ruptures and things from early on, which might be the case here, we might not listen to our body's needs and will override our need to stop for the sake of staying in connection with the practitioner. And then that's what can lead to blowing our system up. And so there is this need for us to start to really recognize when enough is enough. And I said this the other day, that, and Kathy said this, and she's not in private practice anymore, but when she was towards her end, she was seeing some clients for maybe 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and then the rest they would just chat. Yeah.
And that's one way to gauge your practitioner, is like, can they tell that you really only need 5 minutes of work? And that's all we're going to do. Like that's,
So I wish I could be very distinct and say, yes, this will be safe for you. But it comes down to how you can interact with yourself and the materials and go at your own pace. And sometimes the trial and error is stopping before you think you have to stop. And this is something that even Kathy and Peter will say, I knew I was doing too much with the client when I thought, I think I've done too much. This is true words from them. So if you are saying to yourself, I think I've done too much, it might be possible that you've done too much. So I will often sometimes say, stop before you think you have to stop. Just like with exercising, if you're new, just stop before you feel intensity so that you're growing that capacity, you're titrating into the work. Okay.
It's past 1, FYI.
I know. Okay, last one. When I was 4 years old, my brother, who was almost 3, died. I can't find much info on dealing with this trauma. So it's possible that you won't find an information pamphlet or a specific to this, but what's occurring when we're that young imagine, your parents have then another sibling or a child that dies. That is huge grief for them, huge loss.
Mhm.
So you as that 4-year-old are going to experience their field of energy shift dramatically. They might become either over vigilant with you or distant to protect. And it depends on how your parents were in that time and process that. So again, it's your little system probably got thrown into a lot of survival stress, a lot of confusion, and loss.
Yeah. Yeah, as someone who lost a sibling myself, albeit at an older age, I was 18 or no, 13. It's 13. There's a dual impact, like Irene said. There's your own grief, and then there's the impact of the chaos that gets introduced into the family system, which many don't know how to address, right? So what often can happen, this is what happened for me, is my grief, my own personal grief for my brother, got all so tightly packed up because there was no support for me to process it. I was thrown into navigating the increased stress in an already dysfunctional family system, right? So I couldn't access that grief for like 10 years, until like 10 years afterwards, because it got so tightly packaged. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but those are the main things that happen. Is you get your own grief, but then you have to deal with the family system rupture. Oftentimes that makes that grief get compartmentalized.
Yeah. And then if we tie this back to the regulation of the nervous system and growing capacity, when we have that blueprint and that foundation, and we're working with our felt sense, with our emotions, with our body, these areas of the body that we've lightly mentioned today, it can open up the little, like Seth said, these stored packages of emotion, of rage, of how come you weren't there, or feeling empathy for your mom, like, oh my goodness, she lost a child, and not ever realizing how hard that might have been for her or the situation. So yes, thank you, Seth, they said. Let's call it. I'm gonna just a little wrap up here. We've been talking for a lots of questions, lots of answers, but I hope some of you are starting to see, or a lot of you, that very much a lot of our answers come back to building capacity, building this ability to connect with our bodies again, because we maybe didn't connect with them when we were growing up, knowing how to be with activation, big emotions. One of the hallmarks of this work is, from this day forward, when you feel something, we really want you to be with it if you can, or connect to the ground, connect to the environment, so that we're not bringing more stressors in. Of course, with the program and SBSM, you will learn how to do this with skill and mastery, because that's how the program has been developed. Just to note that tomorrow, also at 11 a.m. Pacific has been our magical time. I'll be doing a panel discussion with 9 of our alumni. They're coming onto the Zoom. We did that with 2 folks on Friday with Isabel and Amanda. So that's on our YouTube channel. If you want to watch and hear their experiences with Smart Body, Smart Mind. They had 2 very different traumas that they came into this work with, and had very different healing experiences because of their unique experience growing up and accidents. So that's something that I would encourage everyone to watch if you haven't seen that one. But yeah, tomorrow, 11 a.m., we'll be doing a final call with these alum. We'll take some questions. And as many of you know, tomorrow is the final day, the 19th, to become a member for Smart Body, Smart Mind. Again, as a reminder, when you join, when you're a member, it is yours for as long as we run the program, and all of the materials you can download and you can keep practicing over and over again. Again, this is a lifestyle, is not a quick fix. And yet I have found that when you really treat it like a lifestyle and see it as learning and growth, that is what creates the regulation. And then that's what allows these old traumas to come up and out. So I think that's all I wanted to say as a wrap up. Anything more you would like to say, Seth, as we finish this Q&A today?
Oh, just thanks for being here, everyone. Yeah, really good to see you here. And I'm always get excited when people show up to learn about this stuff. And you know, whatever your choice is, whether you join us, whether you find another way to do the work, just, you know, find a way to do the work. If you're here and you're feeling sparked up and, you know, resonating with this information, then it's important for you. And so I just encourage you to follow that in whatever way feels right for you.
And one thing I forgot to mention is that when we are live, I the person doing the training calls, the live training calls on Zoom that are part of the educational experience that is included within the curriculum, and Seth does the Q&A calls. Everything is recorded. I know that often that's a question. What if I can't make the calls live? Watch afterwards. We have people from different time zones who certainly don't get up at 3 a.m. to be on our calls live. So do not worry if you can't make them live, because it really is about learning at your own pace when is perfect and right for you. Thanks, Bonnie, for being our comment host and getting the questions into a place where I can see them easily. This will be put up onto YouTube for those here live, and for those listening to the recording, thanks for hanging and listening for 2 full hours. All right, signing off. Thank you all for your attention and interest and desire to learn this. It's very important. This is new information for humanity, and I really believe it's going to make a huge difference in how we collectively push forward, evolve, and learn how to thrive rather than just constantly living in these survival loops. So thank you, everyone. You're welcome. Thanks for all your comments. And I will sign off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Bye,
Ciao,
everyone.
everyone.
Ciao.
Bye.